for one to be chosen as the Woodward Chair was a tremendous honor within the Department of Women's Studies at the time. Think the name has changed a bit or
Oh,
slightly.
okay.
And it was just an opportunity. I taught two courses.
Right. What courses?
I
Do you
taught two
remember?
courses. One was on African Canadian women in different semesters, African Canadian women's history. And
Mm.
then my next course was called The Black Autobiographical Tradition. So I
Mm.
combined my two loves. I look at history and I looked at literature. And in the Black Autobiographical Tradition, I look at the writings of Black people in North America, but focusing on Canada, because oftentimes when we think of literature and so on, we look to the United States or the Caribbean. But I wanted to focus on Black Canadian writers and people
Mm.
who wrote autobiographies, people who wrote their memoirs, and dating back to the late 18th century, because one of the memoirs we looked at was that of Boston King, a Black loyalist who wrote his memoirs. I think it was published around 1793 or thereabout. So it was really nice developing those courses, which were really fun courses. I enjoy teaching them, and I think just the location made the world of a difference. There I was on top of the mountain, right, on Burnaby
Yes.
Mountain, and I would look from my classroom or my office, and I would see the ocean or the mountains. I'd be like, "What?" It's like I died and gone to heaven.
Oh,
The
wow.
landscape was just so beautiful from the corridor. In
Yes.
I could
Yes.
see Mount Baker, which is
Yes.
in the United States. So it was, and then there was the Burrard Inlet. Everything was just beautiful, and I was truly inspired. So I taught those two courses because I wanted to bring my knowledge and to also explore new pathways, but I wanted to bring my knowledge of Black studies in Canada to the
Mm.
chair, to the um, uh, Woodward chair. What am I gonna do this year? I actually think I did too much, but I was so excited.
Yeah. Did you do the exhibition
Yeah,
during that time too?
yeah, I did the exhibit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like crazy stuff, you know. I So we have to do a project. We have to do a
Okay.
community outreach, and so and it's all synchronicity. Carl Jung talks about synchronicity
Mm.
because I came to SFU at the very year 2008, which was marked the 150th anniversary of the founding of the province of BC. Whoa,
Oh,
how, wow. And
it's a
and
special year.
yeah, 2008, because the
Hmm.
province was, I guess, became a British colony in 1858.
Mm.
And there was the 150th celebration. It was that year. There were celebrations all around, everywhere you look. 150 BC, 150, and the Vancouver Sun did a big spread, like they devoted pages and pages and pages to this celebration. They talked about the history, the
Mm.
150 years of British Columbia's history, and there was just one paragraph about Black people. I was
Mm.
so cheesed. One paragraph, and in fact, it wasn't that accurate.
Oh, what was the paragraph on, may
It
I
was like,
ask?
yeah, there were some fugitive slaves who came from California. And first of all,
Oh.
they weren't fugitive slaves. They were not fugitive slaves. These were free Black
Mm.
people who had been living and working and building lives in California, and but because California had instituted the Black Code, even though it wasn't a southern state, it was
Mm.
it was a state based, where the codes were now based on racial hierarchy, and Black people
Mm.
were suffering and would continue to suffer. So about 600 of them picked up, eventually 800, and came to British Columbia. The mass migration happened in 1858, and I thought we just all we got was a paragraph when there were
Mm.
huge center spread of other communities. So that really cheesed me off, and that provided further impetus to my doing the exhibit. I was going to do
Right.
the exhibit anyway, but when I
Okay.
saw that, I was so disheartened. I actually was very sad because it spoke to the marginalization of Black people's historical experience in Canada. So I thought, wherever you go, whether you're in Nova Scotia or BC or Alberta, it's kind of like the same thing. So then I thought, okay, I did write a very strong letter to the Vancouver Sun, and I got other people to sign it to say
Okay.
this is not cool, considering that the so-called founder of the province, I mean, this is, founder, these are all, this is settler language, was the first governor, Sir James Douglas,
Right.
was a man of color and was a man from
Yeah.
the we could say the Caribbean. He was from South America. Guyana is in South America, but Guyana, no, at the time was a British colony and was aligned to the Caribbean sphere. And he was a man of color. His mother was a Creole, a mixed race woman. So to think that this man did so much for the British Empire and all the 800 Black people who eventually came up from California, and there was hardly nothing about them in in this big massive celebration everywhere. So I did the exhibit. I would call I would call the Vancouver Sun, I would call the editor, I'd call the publisher. Of course they were quite mean to me, but I didn't take
No.
it personally. and
Of
and
course. Yeah.
eventually someone did I think it was a page spread, and they talked about James Douglas and Rosemary Brown. We know Rosemary Brown, and some other names, important people. But it's again this constant struggle, this constant fighting to for recognition.
Right.
That's them. I did the exhibit. I focused on 22 people. It was about 40. I had
Yeah, I have the slides in front of me
yeah,
actually.
okay,
It's so
good.
informative. Yeah.
Yeah. It was about 40 people, but narrowed it down to 22. And I did a whole bunch of research in the archives, in the North Van archives, in the Vancouver City archives, the provincial archives in Victoria. Everybody was so gracious. People provided wonderful photographs. These institutions, and the photographs that they didn't have, because I also focused on modern people.
Right.
The judges, the Romilly brothers. I had there's a photographer. He's still in Vancouver by the name of David George, who went around and took pictures of modern people, like Nelda Callender and her son Chance Perry. Chance Perry is Nelda's
Right.
son.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chance is a dancer, as you know. Those were taken. Those pictures were taken by David George. So I just had a whale of a time. I got to know the community a lot. I mean, especially the more modern day community, people coming from Africa, because I would go to people's their places of business. So, for example, Omar Cham, who is still in Vancouver, he runs a store called oh my God, some Africa House, but he sells
Okay.
African artifacts, drums. The name of the place escapes me, but he's still there. I know he's still there.
Is it
So
on Commercial Drive?
yeah, Omar is on Commercial Drive.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think.
he's
Yeah.
a
Okay.
Senegalese business person, and so I went to his store. I hung out at his store. I talked to him. I interviewed him. I Yaya Jallo, who is a musician. I went by Nalda. Nalda is the CEO of the Congress of Black Women's
Okay.
chapter in British Columbia, and the office is out in Burnaby. I went there. I went to the events. I went to the event of the launching of the stamp for Rosemary Brown. Canada Post did a stamp of Rosemary Brown, and that stamp was sponsored by the Congress of Black Women. chapter
Okay.
of BC. And so it was really, really nice getting to know people in the community, doing the
Mm,
history. Of course, I dug up more than I could use at the time because
mm,
was
mm,
so much, and I learned so much, learning more about
mm.
the people, the black people who settled on Salt Spring Island. So
Okay.
the exhibit opened February 18th or so in 2009, and it was a big deal.
Where was it held?
It opened at the Tech Gallery, which is at the Harbor Center at SFU downtown.
Okay.
So it was
Yes.
at the Tech Gallery, and it stayed there
Mm-hmm.
for 5 months, and then it went to the City of Vancouver Archives, held it for a long time after that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, in my other capacity, as I've told you, as an editor of a dance magazine, I'm trying to decenter the dialogues around dance as well. So when I look at your slides and see people like Jenny Lagon, um, so I'm like, okay, we have to feature stories of Black dancers because dance is still a very whitewashed territory, especially here in British Columbia. So yeah, as I was saying, your PowerPoint still very timely as of today. Like it's 10 years later, but
Yeah.
still so much work still needs to be done
Yes. I
to
mean,
uncover all the stories.
yes, for sure. Jenny was such a treat. When I interviewed Jenny, she was about 92.
Mm,
And it was just incredible. I mean, I was in the presence of a legend, right?
yes,
Because
yeah.
Jenny did Hollywood.
Mm,
She taught Elvis Presley how to dance, and she told us that they would dance behind curtains, and the
wow.
white dancers like Elvis and others in Halifax, not Halifax, Hollywood, Fred Astaire, they would imitate their moves, the moves of the black dancers and teachers. And she talked about Fred Astaire. She said
Wow.
he um, he was very professional on the set, but when
Mm.
when he'd see the black actors and dancers outside in public, he pretended he didn't know them. Yeah,
Oh, of course.
and she talked about having, you know, purchasing her car. Like she bought a car and it was the roof was off, and driving through Hollywood
Wow.
in her pink car, and being, she said some white kids started throwing stones at her because here this black
Oh.
woman driving in her car
Mm.
in Hollywood, wherever in Hollywood, and they started stoning her. And she said, I got out of my car and I
Oh.
picked up some stone and I threw it at them. And I jumped in my car and drove up. But, so, here's this woman, such a pioneer, such a trendsetter, but at the same time, every single day, dealing with
Mm.
the racism in the studio
Yeah.
and outside of the studio, you know.
Mm.
But it was such a joy being in her presence and talking about her experience in dance, and
Mm-hmm.
and and Len Gibson, another dancer. It's just
Mm-hmm.
tremendous. I mean, I had so much fun, and I felt like I was making a real contribution. It was a dialogue again between
Mm-hmm.
archival work and photography, because the way I wanted to do it, I thought, how am I gonna do this? I just don't want to put up some thing like an exhibit. I wanted it to be fun, and I conceptualized it that way, using photography and
Mm.
archival work. And the nice thing, I mean, it shows too that some of these people, not Jenny Lagong. I mean, she grew up and came about in the age of photography with, there were cameras everywhere, but people like Mifflin Gibb
Right.
and the 1858 folks
Mm.
who, consciously engage in self representation. So they would go to the studio, the
Mm.
photography studio, and take their pictures. And the pictures were beautiful. By 1858, 1860, 1870, photography was very developed. But here they were, very conscious of maybe even posterity, that I'm leaving this for posterity. So
It's
the way
true.
they presented themselves was very beautiful, very conscious. And I thought it was a
Mm,
gift. It was a gift to someone like me who would come 150
mm,
years later and use these
mm.
images to tell the BC story, or tell the Canadian story, or tell the Black story.